I don't think the legal system has anything to do with justice. I don't think that's, like you said, I don't think that's what the legal system is for.
So even if you fulfill your own view of justice, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll be able to achieve it in like the way you want. So I think justice doesn't exist.
A utopian society would you wouldn't even need laws. People would just act perfectly all the time, and there would be no crime, right? There's no quote unquote deviant behavior. Everyone would just agree to be happy forever, and there'd be rainbows and sunshines and unicorns everywhere.
Welcome to my podcast.
You're stealing the podcast. I see.
Of course, you gave me the intro. And my topic, I thought we'd talk about justice, because that's something I've been talking to my mate about. And so she's one of my best friends, and we basically disagree on everything. She's a very religious person, and I'm clearly not. So we just disagree fundamentally on everything. And we were talking about this, and I thought it was a really interesting topic. So I guess we'll start with, how do you define justice?
How do I define justice?
Or what do you think it is?
Well, if I were to go to just a broad definition, I feel like justice is almost like karma, in that any wrongs committed against you are corrected. So
you get what you deserve.
Yeah. That sounds like justice. I don't know. I feel
I'm not trying to put you on a spot. I'm just raising questions.
Yeah.
Is it only about the wrongdoings? What if you do something good and you get something good back, I guess? Is that also part of justice?
I would say no, because I feel like that would go more towards karma than less justice. I feel like justice is I guess because it's so tied to the legal system, it's if something is done to you, you try and get justice, you try and get it to be corrected, or I don't know. I've never really thought about the word itself.
What do you think justice has to do with morality? Is it something that you do that's morally bad, or does it have to be illegal?
I feel like as it stands in reality, justice is how the legal system, you try and pursue justice in that the legal system tries and helps victims of crimes. But I feel like justice, absent of the United States or any nation, just justice in its pure form, I think would exist on a more moral scale, but I don't think that's how it's practiced.
What do you think it should be then? Should it be just strictly a legal thing? Or
I think it should be a moral thing, but if you leave it just to a moral thing, everyone has a different view on what's moral and immoral. And so then in determining what's just in a situation, if you leave it to people to individually determine what they feel is just, it's a lot of times that's not necessarily going to be what you agree with. I think for a lot of people, if their kid is killed in a hit and run, they might feel what is just is that the other person goes to jail, but someone else might think what is just is that person dies who killed the kid.
Yeah.
Or another person might think what is just is that person's kid is also killed, or all extreme examples. But it's if we just let people do what they felt was just, what serves them, it isn't necessarily what is just. But I think as the system is set up now, a lot of people, they don't ever get peace of mind after a trial is over if something's been done to them, especially if a life has been lost. And just sending someone to prison doesn't necessarily rehabilitate them, and it doesn't necessarily give any more peace to the family that was hurt. or like anything like that. And so I think like justice isn't necessarily what in the justice system, justice isn't necessarily what they're going for, I feel like.
So it sounds like, I could be wrong. Are you saying that justice doesn't exist outside the justice system because we all have different moral codes, and also doesn't exist inside the justice system because that law is just...
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with justice can't be pursued outside of the justice system, but in the justice system, they don't actually pursue it. And I think if you were to pursue it on your own outside of the justice system, like, let's say your view is like, if someone kills your kid, you have the right to kill them, then you're going to end up in jail and a lot more people are going to get hurt and yada, yada, yada. So even if you fulfill your own view of justice, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll be able to achieve it in like the way you want. So I think justice doesn't exist. Yeah, I'll just go with that.
Nice. That's what I think. I don't think justice exists. But do you think there is a morally good and a morally bad, something that is universal?
No, I don't think there's anything that's necessarily universally good or so. I mean, like, okay, I'm saying that I think killing someone is bad in the majority of instances. I would say it's morally wrong to kill someone. But then if you're dealing with someone did kill someone, I don't know necessarily what the morally right thing is to do to the like perpetrator, like the murderer, because that's when everything becomes more nuanced.
But do you think if someone does something bad, or let's just say something morally bad, do they deserve something? Do they deserve some kind of punishment?
Yes, but I don't necessarily know what that is. I feel like it's not necessarily they deserve punishment. I think it's more that whoever was wronged deserves some sort of retribution. It's less so, I think that's where my issue comes in with the justice system is you're not helping victims, you're just punishing offenders. And I feel like that's set up wrong. I think victims should be helped more than like offenders are punished. And I think in just punishing offenders, justice isn't being served because you're not doing anything for the people who are actually harmed.
But what do we do for them?
Yeah, I know. That's the thing, isn't it?
So you don't believe in justice, but you also do.
I feel like justice doesn't exist in the real world. I don't think it necessarily couldn't exist. I feel like that if we were going to go into it, the punishments to the offenders should be tied to trying to give retribution to victims. But I don't think it never is in the current like legal system in the US. And I think if we were going to continue, like, obviously people should be punished for wrongdoing. I don't necessarily know what that is, but just sending them to jail and doing nothing for victims isn't necessarily justice. I'm just going to stick with that.
Well, that's more like you're trying to stop them from keep doing what they did.
Yeah.
Right? By putting them in jail.
Yeah, it's not justice. It's just punishment.
Yeah, but that's also potentially helping the people that he could have killed if he's just out there running.
Yeah, I understand that.
So you don't think justice exists, but would you, given the situation, would you always do what is just? What you think is just?
I try to do what I think is just, but
so
that doesn't necessarily mean I always do.
So it's not something that we should always be doing, but it's just the better option.
Yeah, I mean, what do you feel is just, to switch the question around to you?
I don't know. I don't think it's real. I don't think it can exist.
So there's nothing which is just and nothing which is unjust?
Yeah, that is what I think. Because if there's no good or bad that is universal, then there's no what is just and what is unjust. I don't think the legal system has anything to do with justice. I don't think that's, like you said, I don't think that's what the legal system's for.
Yeah.
So it just doesn't exist. It's not a thing.
Do you think it could ever exist, or like no? Like
No. But I do think there are things that are our responsibilities, I guess. There are things that, I don't know, is there like a right thing to do? But my friend who I was talking about, she's very religious. Apparently she thinks there's, you know, a God and that kind of God, like the Christian kind of God.
yeah.
She thinks justice is real.
Yeah, I feel like people who believe in a God feels that God will make things right.
Yeah. So there's at least this agent who decides what's good and bad. And she believes that there is a morally good and a morally bad. So that would make sense if that's what you think.
I think it gets a little iffy with like God deciding what's morally right and what's morally wrong, and also feeling that he knows all and can see all. And it's kind of like, so is he doing it? Or
well, what she thinks is bad is not the opposite of good. Bad is a lack of good, which I thought is very interesting. And also God is goodness itself. He's not a being.
yeah, I feel like that's what this podcast is missing, is religious people who actually have different viewpoints from us. I feel like whenever we get into philosophical topics, a lot of us will end up being somewhat on the same spectrum of ideas. Like you and I are, like we obviously have slightly different interpretations of it, but it's basically the same. But then when you bring someone in who's like brought up and indoctrinated in a very specific moral code, a lot of times that's very different from someone who was brought up in like a more secular setting.
Yeah. And a lot of the times I can't even argue with her. I'm like, we just believe in different things. I can't tell you why you're wrong. I can say that your God is not real.
Yeah. Well, because I don't even view it necessarily as being wrong. Like it's just a completely different viewpoint in how you perceive things.
But sometimes it leaves me feeling like, what if I'm just completely wrong? What if they're right?
I mean, you could always start going to church.
I could.
Or wherever else.
Dylan, we have gone off topic.
Dylan, what immediately comes to your mind when you think of the word justice?
Do you want me to define it or something? I feel like justice is overstated virtue that people focus too much on.
Interesting. What do you mean by overstated virtue?
Like a lot of people, especially nowadays, kind of put it forward and like, oh, we need justice. We need to make sure things are all right and equal. But then at the same time, like our justice system in the US is basically a sham in terms of it's meant for retribution and punishment, but not making things right or equitable. This is actually interesting because I was we talked about this in my ethics class. So basically, like when you sue someone or you take them to court or that they're tried for a crime, what's happening is that the perpetrator is being punished, right? Like that's how the legal system interprets justice. Like by punishing this person, sending them to prison for however many years, we are getting justice for the crime. But then if you take a step back and you think about it, the crime that occurs, depending on its severity, can never be undone, right? Like if you kill someone, that person is just dead, right? Yeah. And there's nothing you can do to make them undead. Like killing the person who killed is not, that's just getting revenge. That's not justice. but also like putting them in prison for life, that's also not justice in like certain senses. So there's been a relatively small push, like it's not mainstream, in the legal system for restorative justice, I think, or some kind of term like that, where the perpetrators have to meet with and work with the victims to make things right. So, like, obviously, it has to be voluntary on both sides, and it probably doesn't work as well with more severe crimes. But I think one example was like a lady got mugged once, and it was very traumatizing for her, and like she had to go to therapy and stuff. But then afterwards, they met up and they worked together to kind of understand each other and kind of reconcile the crime from both sides. And that in that way, they kind of came to a better understanding. And even though it's not like perfect justice, it's a lot more fair for both sides at the end of the process compared to just, oh, we're sending you to jail. You're never going to see this person again. You know, that's it.
So it sounds like justice is a lot about equality and fairness to you. And by calling it an overstated virtue, do you think it's a virtue?
I think it's a virtue, but it is a very difficult virtue to capture.
So another question I have is, are we capable of justice, or are we capable of having that virtue? Like you said, if somebody killed someone really dear to me, and even if you sit them down in front of me, what am I going to do? If I just listen to why they did that, would I be able to forgive them? Or am I just incapable of having that kind of virtue?
I think anyone can attain degrees of virtue, but I think how our society has idealized them is unrealistic, and also focusing on perfect virtues actually works to our detriment in terms of bettering ourselves as individuals, because we either get discouraged or we pursue an ideal that is incompatible with the reality of how humans are and how we operate.
Interesting. So if justice is so unachievable in our society, should we just not consider it? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think that justice is a good concept to guide us, but it shouldn't be our goal, if that makes sense. So like, obviously we can't just live in a lawless society. You know, civilization has come together because we've agreed on certain morals and certain cooperative behaviors. And at the point where we are now, we need some overarching management for how we operate in day-to-day life, basically just, you know, laws and such. And although our justice system is flawed, it does have a purpose in directing us, I guess. Like, obviously, a utopian society would just, you wouldn't even need laws. You know, people would just act perfectly all the time, and there would be no crime, right? There's no quote unquote deviant behavior, right? Everyone would just like agree to be happy forever, and there'd be rainbows and sunshine and unicorns everywhere. But people, okay, fine, no unicorns in Jennifer's utopia. People aren't perfect like that though. So then I think restorative justice is a better goal that we could strive towards than punitive justice, which is how our system is now. I don't think we'll ever reach a perfect point like a utopian society, but that doesn't mean we should give up or stop trying.
So Hope and I were just talking about if justice exists outside of the legal system. Would you say that it does?
Does justice exist outside the legal system?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
But it's definitely like harder to see.
Mm. So if justice is what is guiding us in our legal system, like you said, if that's something we're striving towards, what is it that we're striving towards? What is the kind of justice that's guiding us?
I think I don't know if it's a kind of justice. I think we're guided by a lot of things and we're striving towards a lot of things, and justice is one aspect of our development as a race. But I think like focused on the equity part specifically, which is different from equality. I think focusing on the equity part so that people have the opportunity to live a full and satisfying life. I think that's the overall goal. And the steps to get there include having enough resources for everyone, having enough opportunities for everyone, making sure that crime and bad behavior aren't the only avenues for underprivileged individuals to pursue in order to just survive, you know. We need to be working together to provide for everyone and make sure everyone has the chance to thrive and has the freedom to pursue their own goals.
I have a question, which is, do you think it's moral to pursue justice outside of the justice system?
That is a loaded question because morality, although there are common morals which society generally agrees on, morals in themselves tend to be subjective and or biased based on individuals. I feel like the obvious thing you might think of is vigilante superheroes in movies, you know, like Batman. He's supposed to be a form of justice outside of the law. But then the argument against having that is that it's presumptuous for individuals to think that they have the right to determine what is right and wrong outside the agreed upon social institution. But then you could also flip that around and be like, okay, well, what gives social institutions the right to decide what is morally correct and morally wrong? And, you know, there's literally no absolute perfect answer to this because humans just don't have that amount of knowledge and foresight. So I think the key here is that since we all live in a collective society, you've kind of tacitly agreed to the institutions which serve and also rule you. And whether that's right or wrong is not for me to say, and it's not for you to say. But if you disagree with them, you can take steps to either exit that society or change that society. And then the people will decide from there.
So does justice have anything to do with morality?
I think morals determine how we view justice. And so in that sense, justice is an extension of our morals.
Then how is it guiding our legal system if each one of us, what we think is good or bad, differs so much from each other?
It doesn't differ so much. You know, the majority generally agrees on certain things which are held in law. Like the vast majority, maybe like 99% of people agree on easy things, quote unquote easy things like murder and killing is wrong and stealing is wrong. And so those things get put into law, enshrined in law, and then they are enforced. And then they are also taught to future generations so that those morals perpetuate themselves.
Yeah, but there are also so many things that people disagree on, right?
Yeah.
A lot of things are illegal, and we're trying to legalize a lot of things like gay marriage or like drugs. How does justice come into play with that kind of thing?
I don't think justice directly applies itself to those types of things. At least to me personally, justice is more of a reactive virtue rather than a enforcing virtue. Like you don't, at least in my interpretation, you don't enforce. Okay, wait, I need to be careful how I phrase this. You enforce laws, right, which aim to maintain equity and morals, but you don't enforce justice onto people. Justice is the set of ideas which guide how you react to quote unquote bad behavior. I think that's a safe way of putting it.
Okay, but laws do get enforced upon us. It's not like, but a lot of times it's not like we want it to.
Yeah.
Right?
And I don't think the laws are an extension of justice. I think they're adjacent to justice. And justice is what, oh, see, this is tricky because now it's like there's legal justice and then there's moral justice, right? Is that what you're trying to get at?
Yeah, there always is.
Yeah.
Do you think?
I think all the different forms of justice all kind of interact in like a puddle, and we're kind of like swimming through the puddle at all times. So you're always kind of touching and being touched by different forms of justice.
Okay.
And it's not really up to you you don't have the choice of selecting one type of justice, at least how it is in our current world.
Right. I have a question.
Oh, I have a question. Do you think killing anyone is ever just?
Me personally, I think, let's see, killing someone is just.
Is it ever just?
I don't think killing someone is ever just. However, I can see instances where killing someone is in humanity's interest or perceived interest, but it's never just, because when you kill someone, you are depriving them of their life and their right to live and everything that comes with it. And again, we're just human, we're not God, so you don't have the right to decide that for someone else. But at the same time, like, if I had to kill someone to stop them from killing millions of others of people, maybe you would be inclined to do that. But it's not just. Regardless of whatever situation you're in, it's not just. But there are situations where people would be inclined.
I was thinking more in like, if someone killed your entire family,
okay,
would it be just to kill them?
No. But you would be certainly inclined to do it. But it's not just. Underline that. Bold underline. Just because someone does something wrong to you doesn't give you the right to do something wrong to them. It encourages you to do something wrong to them, but it doesn't make it right. That's my stance, and I will stand on it.
Okay, I don't have any other questions.
Yep, that was it. Dylan, what do you think the topic is?
Okay, see, you guys were grilling me on justice, but I think that's a deception. Or is it a double deception where it was about justice? I feel like, okay, I think it's either virtue or you were talking about the laws like how institutions making laws against the interests of their people.
Yeah, we're just talking about justice.
Ah,
It
You got
always gets
tricked by
people.
your own trick. You tricked yourself. Oh well. Thank you for listening to my podcast. That'll be it for today. I've taken over your podcast, by the way.
okay, cool.
Or you were on timeout.
What time out?
She's a thief.
I can take a vacation and you can guest host the podcast.
But you won't have to edit it. He'll still do that.
Oh, what the?
I wouldn't know how.